So here are those ducks that I was talking about. They are a key element, as Steve mentioned, in making this rice farming sustainable. The ducks eat the bugs, the worms, and because they eat, their manure is left behind, and that will fertilize the soil. And here's some fellows. They're out there in the fields where the rice is being grown, and they're repairing some of the waterways that we've been talking about in terms of how the water is shared all the way from the volcano out to the sea, and how one neighbor uses the water, then passes it on to the next neighbor. When they've cut their rice down, it's often, as I mentioned, one of the better times to herd the ducks right out onto the rice fields and have them be eating the pests and the bugs and the worms. They're the natural pesticide, no chemicals. And their manure, their droppings, become the natural fertilizer. No chemicals used. It's a sustainable way to grow rice on the beautiful island of Bali. Now, some of those bags of rice are brought out to big areas and poured out, and this is this woman's process of separating the stalks and the leaves from the rice itself. You can see this big mound of rice there drying in the sun. And after this process, the rice is cleaned and oftentimes refined, so it may look odd that they're walking right over their rice, but this is how they separate the rice from the things that they don't want in their rice, like the stalks and the leaves. And then, of course, after this process, the rice is cleaned, prepared, and I have to say, I've enjoyed eating the rice that I have had on the beautiful island of Bali. Here is our end product. Now, Steve wants to tell us a little bit about what's happening with the rice farming in Bali, something new.
You tell me what this project is with UNESCO that deals with the rice farming in Bali.
The Balinese are trying to get a World Heritage Site here, and that means that the United Nations, UNESCO, would call something in Bali worthy of the attention of the world, a World Heritage landscape. And what we're trying to do here in Bali is to make that a landscape that will help to keep the subaks alive. So we've chosen about 50 subaks, 50 villages, and they're going to be part of the UNESCO site. So the idea is that these are subaks that will be they will welcome visitors, and they will be going back to the old way of farming in Bali. They'll be preserving Balinese farming. A couple days ago we had a meeting with the governor of Bali to ask him if he would support it. And he said not only would he support it, he'd go to Paris with us to try to convince UNESCO to make it happen, because we think it's really important, and he agrees with us. So the basic idea of the UNESCO project is help the farmers to protect their land so it won't be turned into something else, so that they can keep growing rice, keep moving their ducks around, keep this way of life going, something that's lasted for 1,000 years in Bali. But before we got started, we asked farmers, do you guys want to keep doing this? I mean, would you rather sell your land to someone else and get the money? Would you rather work in a hotel? And so far everybody is saying no. We want to keep doing what we're doing. We want to be farmers. We want to keep the subak system alive. So because that's their choice, that's what the UNESCO project is about, making it possible to keep this piece of Bali alive, not only for the Balinese, but for the whole world.
How is it that the Indonesian rice farmers have been able to farm the same way for over 1,000 years without harming their environment?
You know that rice is the most important food crop on the planet. More people eat rice than anything else. And here in Bali, they've been growing rice for over 1,000 years without adding any kind of chemical inputs, no fertilizers, no pesticides, just using the natural environment. So how can they do it? Because, plants take something out of the environment. It takes energy to grow a plant. Mm-hmm. There are basically two things. One of them is when the rain falls on that volcanic landscape, it takes the minerals out of the soil, picks up the minerals, and they flow down through the irrigation systems into the rice paddies. So it's a kind of automatic delivery of phosphate and all the minerals that the plants need. And then the other thing is they make use of their ducks. So they lead the ducks into the rice paddies after the harvest, and the ducks will eat the insects that otherwise would eat the new rice. It would harm the growing rice, and they also fertilize the rice with their droppings. So by moving the ducks in after the harvest from field to field, they're replenishing the nutrients in the field, and they're removing the pests so that the next rice crop can get started, without having pests eating the rice.
Perfect. Great. Awesome. I love that. So the government brought in the Green Revolution. These rice farmers have been farming the same way for over 1,000 years. It's even been written on a pillar on the beach. That's how it's known, among other ways, that these people have been farming the same way traditionally for over 1,000 years. The Indonesian government begins the Green Revolution. Can you tell me what that is and how it affected the traditional rice farming?
Yeah. The Green Revolution began in the 60s, and at that time people were worried that there wasn't going to be enough food to feed all the world's people. So the Green Revolution meant replacing the old varieties, the old crops, with new ones that were especially bred to grow fast and to take up nutrients from fertilizer. They were bred to pick up. The Green Revolution meant switching to new kinds of plants that were made to grow fast and to take up their nutrition from chemical fertilizers. So in the beginning, this was a big success because you could grow more rice faster. But the problem was all those chemicals. As time went on, they're replacing lots of different native varieties of rice with just one kind of rice. And that kind of rice depended upon the chemical fertilizer. So you take these ancient rice paddies that have been there for centuries, that are kind of in an ecological balance. Suddenly you're just pouring on chemical fertilizers. What happens is you destroy the fertility of the paddy. What that means is within a few decades, the paddy is no longer a self-sustaining ecosystem. It becomes dependent on those fertilizers, and after a while the fertilizers aren't enough. So the Green Revolution was important at the time. It helped Indonesia get past a crisis in food production, but now that's over, and we need to cope with the consequences.
Well, basically it wasn't sustainable, right?
Right.
You couldn't farm that way over and over again without harming the environment, the air, the land, the water.
Yeah.
So with the chemicals, correct? They found out planting rice that way was not sustainable. They couldn't do it for 1,000 years.
That's right. What happened was the Green Revolution was kind of a quick fix. So for a few years they could get a lot of extra rice, but then after that the quality of the soil began to go down fast, and it looked as though this system could no longer be sustained. So now the Balinese are going back. They're trying to go back to the old way, using the natural fertility of the soil to grow old Balinese rice, which is also much more nutritious.
And the old Balinese rice and the traditional way of growing rice had been sustainable. At least they had sustained it for 1,000 years.
We know because there are ancient inscriptions writing from 1,000 years ago that talk about rice agriculture. We know that there are places in Bali where people have been growing rice year after year, century after century for over 1,000 years. So that is sustainability. I mean, that means they're able to maintain this way of life indefinitely. And if you look at their rice paddies, they're beautiful. They look like a garden.
Yeah.
So I could
part of rice farming, part of farming this rice for over 1,000 years involves the water. And I understand that the people here on the island of Bali practice something called agama tirta. I believe it's called something like the religion of water, and there's a temple system that goes with this religion of water. How would you describe this concept and the temple system? How does it work?
Okay. Well, the Balinese call their religion agama tirta, which means the religion of holy water. And they revere water as the source of life. And in Bali there are hundreds of temples called, well, we call them water temples in English. So what's a water temple? Well, all the farmers who share water from the same place, the same canal or spring, they come together, they form a group called the subak. And the subaks decide how they're going to use the water. So if you can think about it like a river with going down the slopes of the volcano, there are lots of subaks down the way. And to make sure that the ones down at the bottom get enough water, they have to have some way to plan it so the ones on the top don't take it all, right? And so what the water temples do is arrange a coordinated schedule so that first one group gets water and then the next subak. They can make a plan like that, and in that way the water is shared evenly through the year so that all the farmers can get the water they need for their crops.